Welcome to the TC Dojo from Single Sourcing Solutions. The TC Dojo is a TechCom community that is driven by you. Tell us what you want to learn. You choose the topics, and we find the experts.
Today, we have Dr. Jack Labriola. Jack is an assistant professor of technical communication at Kennesaw State University. He teaches usability testing, information architecture, and the senior capstone design course. And this fall, he's teaching the intro to technical communications. He's researched, written, and presented on a variety of topics, ranging from a co-edited collection on content strategy and technical communication to articles on minimalist design, our favorite, aesthetics, mobile user experience, conference papers in university partnerships and building and collaboration with students and research toolkits. His professional mission, and I love this part, his professional mission is to continue to discover opportunities to research and create better experiences for users in their day-to-day use of technology. Welcome. We're going to save questions until the end, but be sure to type them in as you go so you don't forget what you wanted to ask. And I'll stop the share, pass it to you. Share your screen. All right. We've got your, not the presentation view. And you're muted again.
Is that better?
There we go. We got sound now. We got the slide the design view, not the presentation view. But it's all yours. And your sound's off again.
Don't you love technology?
This is not our right.
I know.
Thanks everybody for sticking with us. Here we go. All yours.
There we go. And it's looking all good on your end then?
Perfect.
All right. Excellent. Well, as Liz has said, I am Dr. Jack Labriola. This is what every TPC professional needs to understand about UX or user experience. To give a little bit of what I like to say, a roadmap of what I'm going to be discussing, sort of the high points, the topic areas. I'm going to start with a little introduction, introduce myself, who I am. I know Liz has already sort of given me a little bit of that already. I'm going to define user experience or UX. We're going to talk a little bit about how UX fits into sort of TPC, which is technical and professional communication. And then also how TPC fits into UX. And once we sort of get some of our definitions out of the way, I want to sort of give you my top 5 things to consider, or maybe the top 5 things to try and work into your current sort of process in your industry, and how you can sort of incorporate some UX best practices in there. And then we'll hopefully have some time for some questions, and I will hopefully have some answers for y'all. So feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll get to them at the end. But as Liz has sort of already introduced, I am Dr. Jack Labriola. Here's a picture of me pre-haircut, got a little haircut here. But it is indeed the same person. I'm an assistant professor of technical communication at Kennesaw State University. And as Liz said, I teach classes in usability testing, user experience, information architecture, capstone design courses. And my research outside the classroom focuses on user experience, focuses on usability, content strategy, and as Liz said, the sort of thing that led her to me, autonomous vehicles or self-driving cars. I think the important thing to note about any research area or any industry that you're in is that, as many of us probably see tech comm or tech writing in a lot of spaces, I often see UX everywhere, and I see user experience in everything that I do, including self-driving cars, including content, documentation, writing, and of course, websites, apps, etc. And so all of that stuff sort of is who I am and what drives me. In case you want to add me or connect with me on a whole variety of things, I have my website, my LinkedIn profile for the academics out there, my org ID to see the publication list. But I'm always happy to chat, always happy to connect and meet new people and talk about all things that are relevant. And I kind of want to start off by thinking about defining user experience, because I think there's a lot of different ways that we can think about it. And if we want to consider the ways that, or things that tech comm professionals need to know, I think we need to all kind of have the same working definition of user experience. But there's sort of a few caveats that I want to start with. The first is that there are a lot of different perspectives, different takes, opinions, viewpoints, whatever you want to call them, about defining user experience. There's a lot of different definitions out there because it appears in a lot of different industries. And so the second caveat is that this is my perspective. This is my view of user experience. I try to give a very broad definition of it. So I hope you'll join me, at least in this journey here, this 30 minutes, sort of with this understanding, my perspective. And then the third caveat is that there's a common misconception. I feel like if we aren't quite familiar with user experience or UX, we might be familiar with usability. And it's a common misconception that UX, is usability, but they are a little bit different. Just to give sort of the comparison, we can define usability as studying the effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction with which specified users achieve goals in particular environments. We're really focused on, can a user accomplish a task? Yes or no? How fast can they do it? Were they satisfied with that sort of product? User experience, and the definition that I like to use and I like to tell my students and people who are new to the term, comes from usability.gov. And they say that user experience or UX focuses on having a deep understanding of users, what they need, what they value, their abilities, and their limitations. And this is really important because, as the sort of name suggests, it's encompassing the entire experience of interacting with a product or a document or a website or an app or whatever it may be. The entire experiences, what you valued, what you liked, what you disliked, what I was able to do, what I was able to understand or not. To dive just a little bit deeper, usability is related. It is an element of UX. And one of my favorite breakdowns comes from Frank Guo, UX Matters, is that user experience is value plus usability plus adaptability plus desirability. And in case that's hard to remember, he also created this handy little chart. And what I like to think about in this chart is sort of these little subheadings, right? If we think about value, we're thinking from our user's perspective. Is this product useful? Is this document useful? Then we do have usability. Is it easy to use? Adaptability in terms of, is it easy to start using? Once I jump in there, is it easy to get started? Does it make sense on where I need to go? And then desirability, is it fun? Is it engaging? Does it draw me in? Does it want me to, or, sort of create this desire to come back and do it again, use it again? And so if user experience and UX in this context is, again, thinking about all these different components from the user's perspective, I want to think a little bit about how UX fits into a lot of tech comm practices that we are probably already familiar with. And I'm going to put, Frank Guo's little box in the corner here because we're going to walk through it. But for me, every time I talk to a tech comm professional, they've been incorporating, whether or not they've called it this or whether or not they've thought about it, they've been incorporating a lot of different UX practices into their own routines for a long time already. Again, they just may not have known to call it UX. And so I like to consider the traditional technical writer. At any point in time when we are writing a document, we are doing some audience analysis. Before we start writing, before we draft up things, we have to think about who is going to be using, reading, interacting with, engaging with this document. Who is that target population? That's already doing some user experience because we're always focusing and putting value on the users. So who's reading my documentation? What are they using it for? What kind of goal are they trying to accomplish? And what do they need to accomplish that? And the way I like to think about it is this. If we take these four elements in this box, who is reading my documentation? and sort of the what do they need to accomplish can go hand in hand. Because I like to think, okay, if it is this specific user, it's this particular audience, they need a variety of things. And a variety of those things are going to come from me as the writer, as sort of the master of this document. And if I'm able to think about the 4 elements here, what do my users value? What do they find useful in the products that I create, the documentation that I create? And then is that document or how-to guide or tutorial or get started, whatever it is we're creating, is it easy to use? And if we were giving this document, we were giving this deliverable to someone for the first time, we think about adoptability. Is it easy for them to get started using? Does it make sense for them where they should begin and start? And then we could think about desirability, and, Guo says, is it fun and engaging? And maybe our, database that we're helping create isn't the most fun, but is it engaging? Does it bring your user in and help them, oh, this is visually appealing, or I know where to look? We're doing a lot of this stuff already, even in the most basic technical writer document. We are thinking about UX, even if we're not sort of using that terminology. And what I've started to see the sort of industry trend to is sort of this evolution of the technical writer into what I've started to see a lot of job ads ask for, either in the job title or in the responsibilities, is the UX writer. This sort of hybrid technical communicator, technical writer, user experience expert, all sort of combined into one. And if you haven't heard the term UX writer before, there's a really great definition from Bobby Jones that I love, or Bobby Wood, sorry, that UX writing is the practice of crafting the customer-facing text or copy that appears within the design of digital products. So if you open up an app, all of the writing, all of the text, all of the content that's in that app should be developed by a technical writer, a UX writer, someone who has experience with writing complex information to a wide variety of audiences, but now in a more digital space. And I love this sort of simplification from Bobby Wood, is that simply put, UX writers are interaction designers, but for words. Instead of focusing on the wireframe and the mock-up, we're focused more on the content aspect, the words that are going in there. And so that's how I've sort of seen the blend of TPC sort of moving into this UX space in the form of a UX writer, and an opportunity that I think a lot of us as tech comm professionals and technical writers can really make a case for why we need to expand our role in the UX space. And so if that's sort of how I'm envisioning user experience sort of broadly, and how I see and the trends and the people I've spoken to in industry, the trends towards how we as tech comm professionals can utilize user experience to our advantage to help people and advocate for our users, these have sort of had the inspired me to consider these my sort of top 5 things about user experience that you should consider in your TPC work, in your tech comm workplace. And I'm going to give you sort of the 5 things here, and then we'll take a little bit of a deeper dive individually. The first one is understanding who your users are. The second one is developing and retooling what I like to call your toolkit. The third thing is building in research practices and gathering data inside your workflow. The fourth thing is communicating findings and data of things that you learn about your users. And then the fifth thing is advocating for them. And I'm going to explain what all this means individually here. So the first thing is about understanding who your users are. And again, this might be something that we are already doing before we start writing, before we start, drafting any content. We're probably already thinking about who's going to read this, who's going to engage with it. That's already one of the top things that someone in the UX space is looking for you to do. Consider who interacts with your documentation or your product or your services. Or if we think about that UX writer, like who reads your copy, who is opening up that website for the first time and reading the content on there, who's opening up that app for the first time, or the software tool. It could be, Microsoft Word or PowerPoint or something like that. Who is reading the copy in there? But the added thing from user experience that I think is really helpful to think about, yes, we want to think about who our users are in terms of, the target sort of population, but I really encourage people to think about the kind of environment that our users, that end user is in when they are interacting with our product, our service, our copy, our, documentation, whatever we want to call it. Because depending on this sort of use case, I think it's going to differ the way that we approach our writing. If we think about someone opening up their app at home and on their phone, and all they're trying to do is just sit at their office, at their desk, or in their kitchen and just sort of read things, there's not a lot of distractions around them. That's a very different environment for me downloading an app for the first time while I'm on a train headed somewhere and there's noise all around me. Maybe I'm standing, I'm holding on to the rail. I've only got one hand on my phone. That completely changes the way that we may want to think about how they interact with our text, how they are able to read or skim or gloss over some of the content. And I also want us to think about what kind of previous knowledge do our users sort of bring to the table? Is the document that they are interacting with an updated version of an old manual or old how-to guide? Or is this the next generation phone that they've bought? And we can assume that maybe they had the previous version and they know a little bit about it. All things that I think are really important to bring into and start to really incorporate into our TPC process. The second of my top 5 things is developing and retooling what I like to call a toolkit. And in my mind, when I say this, a tool is a research method. And the toolkit is sort of realistically our brain. All the research methods that we have at our disposals, things that we've used before, things that we know how to do. And there are probably tools that you may already know or you sort of may already have in your toolkit. If at any point in time during the writing process or the documentation process, if you've ever interviewed a user to ask questions, to gain information, to gain knowledge about how that might influence your writing or your work, that was using your toolkit. If you've ever sent out a survey to collect data about what people liked or disliked, you sent out on a scale of 1 to 5, how helpful was this document? You've done UX research. If you've ever done A/B testing where you said, okay, I want to use this old copy and then this new copy that I wrote and see which one is easier to understand or which one's more effective. You've done some UX research. And what I've seen a lot of these technical writing jobs popping up, or especially these UX writing jobs pop up, is having a toolkit. When I had just looked over this past weekend, there have been about 1,000 new jobs that have been posted that had UX writer or UX writing somewhere either in the title of the job or in the job description. That's 1,000 new jobs that have come out in the last month alone that are looking for someone who has a little bit of a background or at least knows how to deploy their toolkit. And so the advice I've gotten from people, from UX writers currently in the industry, is that you should always be learning, always be picking up more tools, always be adding more tools to your toolbox, retooling, if you will. And then trying things out. There are so many different methods in addition to interviews or surveys or A/B testing. There's so many things. Try something out. See if that gets you some really great data. See if you're able to learn something really cool about your documentation. And if it works, let's incorporate it into our process. If it doesn't, we try a different tool next time. But developing and retooling your toolkit, I think, is a really important one. And sort of building off of that, once we sort of have our toolkit, is thinking about building in research practices. And I always like to think of it in terms of sort of how might we do this thing, right? Not can we or can't we, but how might we incorporate this? And so the first thing is sort of how might we bring research into our current TPC workflow in terms of our writing or our drafting, our documentation flow that we have right now. Is there any point during that process that we think that we might be able to bring in some of our tools? We might be able to take them out of our toolbox and do something with it, get actual feedback from our users. And it also begs this question of how might we utilize that toolkit for any given project? Because As we know, not every project is the same, and not every tool is going to work for every single project. And so we might need to think about, okay, for a project like this, it's really helpful to do some interviews. For a project like this, it's really helpful to send out a survey or whatever it may be. We need to think about how can we incorporate that into our process. And really one of the biggest things from the UX world that we want to, when we're gathering feedback and we're gathering data, is really incorporating that research as soon as possible. So how early might we be able to show something to our target population? How early might we be able to show them a draft, a paragraph, a sentence? Depending on what we're building or what we're writing, I think it makes sense to sometimes even just show them a sentence and say, hey, does this work? Does this make sense? Let's figure this out now before we've written the same word or used this definition, 15 times in our document. So thinking about how we might be able to incorporate this into something early on. And one of the other things that I want to think about is, once we do get feedback, is how we incorporate that feedback into our work. Because it's one thing to say we're going to do research. It's one thing to interview a bunch of people or send out a survey. But if that data just kind of sits there, that knowledge you've learned just kind of sits there, and we don't actually use it, then we wasted a lot of our time. We didn't bring any of that feedback from our users and improve our product. So how can we incorporate feedback into our work? And if we're implementing and we're building in these research practices, we also then, my fourth thing here is, we need to figure out how we're communicating any of the things that we learn to the people that can make the difference, because sometimes it is us, and sometimes maybe we don't have control over the master document. But as a TPC professional, as a tech writer, as a technical communicator, we are pros at communicating complex information, complex ideas to a whole wide variety of people. So let's use that power. Let's use that ability to think about, okay, we learned stuff from our users. We've gathered some feedback on what they liked, disliked, didn't understand, found confusing about our content, about our writing, about our documents. We need to tell somebody. So we need to understand who's our client in this situation, or perhaps who are our stakeholders? Who are we delivering these findings to? And sort of adjusting on the fly as to how we're going to communicate findings to them in a way that's understandable or perhaps actionable. Because again, if we can't incorporate it in there, then it's not going to be of any use to us. But part of what goes to that is actually having some patience. It may take some time to figure out what the best way to deliver your data is to people. I'm working with a client right now who I originally said I was going to write up weekly reports for them, but they told me they didn't have time to read them. So I said, how about a mini little 30-minute slide deck at the end of every week? I'll give you a little presentation. Oh, we can't schedule everybody for Fridays all the time. And so we kept going back and forth until I found the best way to communicate my findings with them, which was this sort of Q&A document where I would tell them what I tried to learn about our writing, what we did learn from our users, and sort of gave it to them that way. It takes some, finessing. It takes a little bit of practice, but figuring out how we can communicate our findings to the team of writers or technical communicators that need to know it, and how they can sort of incorporate that feedback into improving our product. And then the fifth thing, final thing, is about always advocating for your users. I mean, everything that you do, you should be considering how the user interacts with it. When that it can be writing, it can be documentation, it can be designs. You should be considering their knowledge coming in, their experience coming in, the environment that they're going to be in. But if we're at the table, we're at the meeting, we're at the virtual Zoom call with our coworkers, if we're not there advocating for our users, who is? And so sort of how might we get others around us to see the value of UX? Because users with a positive experience, they tend to want to come back. They want to use your product. They want to use your services. They want to share that document with their friends. Oh, this was so helpful to get me started with this new app, this new software, this new tool. And if we're not advocating for them in that room, we know the users aren't in the room with us. Someone has to do it. So incorporating these 5 things sort of into your workplace, into your process, your current process. And again, you might be doing some of this stuff, but maybe you didn't think about it in terms of user experience or UX, but you've been doing it. incorporate some of the things that maybe you aren't doing yet, and figure out the best way to bring some real feedback into your workplace and into your documentation. And so just to quickly wrap up here, because I know this is a very quick sort of presentation here, sort of in sum, the way I think about user experience is about having a deep understanding of your users, what they need, what they value, what their abilities are, and what their limitations are. And if we think about that as UX, we can think about our top 5 things: understanding who our users are, developing and retooling our toolkit, building in research practices and gathering data, communicating our findings and that data to whoever has the power to sort of enact them. And then the 5th thing is about advocating for your users. And if nothing else, if you don't remember any of those top 5 things off the top of your head, walk away with the end goal in mind about creating a better experience for them. That's the end goal. Whoever's definition of UX you want to use, whoever's approach you want to use, that's totally fine. But as long as the end goal is to create a better experience, create a better document, create a better database, website, app, whatever it may be, create a better one for our users so they have a better experience. And I have so many sources and so many additional reading things that I could share with everybody. I have a couple of them here. Of course, happy to share the PowerPoint and give those links to y'all. But in an effort to save time, I'm just going to pop it off to the question slide. I want to thank everybody for their time today. If you have any questions, let's chat about them. But if we run out of time or whatever it may be, I'm always happy to answer any emails. Feel free to send me an email offline, and I'm happy to engage. But thanks for listening, everybody. I'll toss it back over to you, Liz.
The TC Dojo Mastermind Groups are monthly driven member discussion groups where attendees present their specific challenges to a group of their peers in a confidential, supportive environment. They can get feedback and advice about topics on their mind in real time from others who've been in their shoes. It's been amazing to participate in and a lot of fun too. You can sign up at the TC Dojo website at mastermind.tcdojo.org. We know sometimes magic is just having the time to collaborate with someone who's been where you are.
.com.
Thanks for coming to the TC Dojo by Single Sourcing Solutions, where it's all about you. Subscribe to our mailing list at join.tcdojo.org. You'll get a link to this session, as well as announcements for future sessions, and a convenient link to the survey. Every month, we look at the survey results so we can go out and find experts willing to share their expertise. Why should we tell you what to learn? You should tell us. Vote now at survey.tcdojo.org. As always, the TC Dojo is our pleasure to host. If you need more personal help and want to speak to one of our TC Dojo Masters in Residence, just go to ask.tcdojo.org, where you can get your question answered and be on your way. Thanks again, and see you next time.